All right, well, let's bring things back here to France now. Alison Sargent joining me once again in the studio to take a look at how the French parliamentary election is being seen in the press. Hi there, Alison.
Hey, Kat.
Emmanuel Macron, he wasn't, of course, standing in this election. He's the president, not a parliamentary candidate, but it's his face that's all over the newspapers today.
It sure is. We can take a look at one example. This is Aujourd'hui en France, Le Parisien. There's Macron. Un coup de maître, they call it, a masterstroke. The president triumphed. The opposition was crushed. Abstention reached record highs. A lot of French papers today are really focusing on what a landslide this was. And it's true that when you looked at that electoral map last night, it did look as if it had been kind of painted. It was just a solid block of color. We can see this literally happening in a cartoon in Le Parisien by Rinson. We see Emmanuel Macron and his Prime Minister Edouard Philippe admiring their work after having painted France. Edouard Philippe is saying, we'll still have to come back next week for the second coat. And Macron says, yes, just a few finishing touches.
Indeed. Just a reminder for our viewers that was the first round of the parliamentary election. We've still got some runoff votes in almost every single constituency to come next weekend. But the projections are that Emmanuel Macron's party will be sweeping this vote. That's reflected in a lot of the international papers as well.
It is, Kat. I brought just one example, the Financial Times. We can see Macron's face on the front page there as well, along with his wife Brigitte as they're leaving the polling booth. The paper says that the vote was really a test of the backing of Macron, and it's one he seems to have passed. As you can also read in the German daily Der Tagesspiegel, they say Macron triumphs in parliamentary elections, and the paper sees his party's sweep as a really positive message and a victory for Europe, much as many German papers reacted to his election in the first place. And there's one editorialist from Der Tagesspiegel that actually talks about the Second French Revolution.
All right, well, revolutionary or monarch. Some papers seem to say that Emmanuel Macron is more of a king than a president.
That's right. Some papers are a little bit worried about the power that this is going to give the new French president, the French president. You can see in Belgian paper Le Soir, they say la voie royale, the royal path, or the king's way, so sort of another monarchy reference there. The paper says after winning his absolute majority, Macron now has his hands free to govern. Papers here in France are making that king comparison as well. You can take a look at this cartoon from Willem in Libération. We see Macron taking the liberty of carrying out his own coronation as the nation bows down around him.
All right, let's look a bit wider. Russian state media, perhaps not necessarily the media outlet that you'd expect to have a problem with a political strongman, but there are some warning alarms being sounded at Russia today.
That's right. They might not have a problem in general with political strongmen, but they do have a problem with Emmanuel Macron. We can remember that Emmanuel Macron actually called Russia today propaganda during the state visit from the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So the media outlet is not a huge fan of the French president, and they talk about the danger of an absolute presidency in their article about the election today. And they're asking if French voters are in the process of making their president all-powerful.
All right, that concern is shared by some elements in the French press as well.
It is. Communist paper Humanité is already looking forward to that second round next week. They're calling on the left to come together and get what seats they can. They say because of the majority of abstention we risk seeing a Chambre Bleue Macron, a parliament in Macron's shade of blue. And for Humanité, this wave of Macronism is threatening to wipe out socialist values. Similar idea in Libération, the left-wing paper. They say abstention is everywhere, opposition is nowhere. That headline is a take on a famous phrase of Victor Hugo's where he said, police are everywhere and justice is nowhere.
All right, interesting. Well, let's move on from the game of politics to an actual game, a sporting game, tennis. We had history made here in Paris yesterday by Spanish player Rafael Nadal.
That's right, Kat. He won his 10th Roland Garros trophy, and as the French people like to call him, Rafa. Pro-business paper L'Opinion took that opportunity of those two events happening yesterday, the election and Roland Garros, to make a little sports metaphor on their front page. They say Macron plie le match, Macron seals the win. And in this drawing by CAC, you can see some of Macron's adversaries, although it's a little hard to recognize them because they are drowning in tennis balls. But there we see Marine Le Pen, far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and socialist leader Jean-Christophe Cambadélis.
There we go, drowning in tennis balls, like you say. Thanks very much. Alison Sargent looking through the political and sporting news in the French and international papers.